I have spent my career, like 20 years or something, taking on wicked problems at the intersection of media and technology and culture, and trying to use the best of academia, which there are some great parts and some less great parts, as we maybe know, in conjunction with the practice, and trying to, from those intersections, that interdisciplinary work, that intersectoral work, that cross-practice work, I think that's where the power and the action and the complexity lie. So that's kind of what I do, and I think mostly that traditional institutions are hard-pressed to engage in those spaces. We're built for these silos. I thought about what GIF I was going to insert here, like heads exploding, herding cats, career suicide, and I decided those are all pretty dark, and I would just go with that and let you guys imagine the crazy. I am not a storytelling expert, as you will hear over the next 10 minutes, but the power of story looms large in everything I've done as a place where head and heart connect and reality and possibility meet, where imagination and creation can come together. And more important than ever, it's this unifying force that makes the impossible possible, that makes change, which is otherwise so elusive, actually achievable. And I feel like in academia in particular, we tend to rest on facts and think that's going to be enough, or what we see as facts. And so this is where, where this conference for me comes in, is I want to learn, and that's what I want to challenge you and invite you to help me to develop a story today. But that is what animates a lot of the work that we do at the Innovation Lab, in particular two of the things that I'm most engaged with, which I'm going to talk about today. First, what I'm not going to talk about is this amazing participatory civic media fellowship that we are launching. Thank you, Jen Humke, with many of the MacArthur grantees in the room, something that we're really excited about, to invest in building human capital, building network capital, and actually building the field out that Jen so eloquently described. So that's a big thing I'm working on, and that is absolutely infused with story everywhere. And then the other thing I'm working on that I want to talk about today is the census. Yes, that sounds geeky and weird. That's 2 years ago I would have been like, what, census? But I've become a total census nerd, and let me just say, I'm going to foreground this. Census needs a story. We have some real problems, as we do with most things in the government right now, but the census offers tremendous power for our communities, for our economy, for our democracy. And left unaided, I'm afraid that not great things are going to happen. What I want to do is just quickly ask, by a show of hands, how many folks feel like they know something about the census? Oh my God, this is awesome. Can I get you just really quickly, tweet link, to shout out some of the things you know about how it works, what you're concerned about, anything? Just like shout. Citizenship question. Undercounting. Keep them coming. Awesome. Okay, they come to your house. These are all really important, and just a little smattering of like the complexity that this story that you all are going to help me generate has to deal with. Like, let's start. This is, as you may recognize, the Constitution. There is the census in that not really visible box. Just a couple of paragraphs in, the framers are saying every 10 years we're going to count every person living in the country. And we have done that every 10 years since 1790. It's the largest peacetime mobilization that the government undertakes. In 2010, it cost about $12 billion. They hired 500,000 people to work on this, in addition to many other folks who are working outside government. As a result, it drives money, over $800 billion a year in federal spending. It drives power, congressional apportionment, redistricting. We are, in fact, as far as I know, the only country that links a census to representation. And finally, all kinds of influence from business, philanthropy, research, genealogy, you name it. So it's a thing. Now, I'm not saying it's a good thing, just like pure and simple, it's good. It's complex, just like the rest of our history. You can see here almost, if you look, how they count people: free, white, females, including heads of family, slaves. So census has been problematic going back to the beginning, and it has lots of problems still. And what I want to do is share some of those challenges that it faces, because these are the things that the story has to leap over and help us to get folks to care about enough to be able to hold their nose in some instances and move on. Census is not as innocuous as it sounds, counting people, as many of you observed. It has a long history, sometimes troubled, including in 1940, helping the government to populate the Japanese American internment camps with census data, right? Something that couldn't be done today, that was kind of questionably legal then. So these battles have occurred since the census began, basically, and they track what's happened in the country. They also continue to this day things like ethnicity, race and ethnicity on the census, which are unsatisfying for any number of reasons to lots of us. These are things that we have to address, and the understanding that people have of the census is, in fact, colored by them. Also, you can think about the LGBTQ community, which has, in 2010, used these stickers on the back of their census forms to advocate, to say, hey, we actually want to be counted. This is not fair that we're not being counted, as many people feel on the ethnicity survey. So there's advocacy around changing what the census actually looks like, but there's a lot of people who want to be seen, right? And seen and recognized and have their communities served by their census. Now, there's also, paradoxically, a real tension there, and a lot of people who don't want to be seen or who are afraid to be seen. And right now is a great moment for that, right? Where kind of fear of government and distrust is at an all-time high. It invokes, for many, fears of ICE or a population registry and much, much more. And it's just one of the ways that the census is being politicized. You mentioned the citizenship question, which of course is, I would say, unnecessary and has proved to already be toxic, regardless of whether the Supreme Court decides to keep it or not. Now, all this stuff matters because there's a historic overcount and undercount. Folks like me, white folks, get overcounted by at least 1%, whereas people of color, broadly writ, get undercounted by 1, 2, or even more percent. We know that, and that has significant material and representational impacts, as well as on voting rights, or you name it. As we heard, if you figure that on the order of $2,000 per person flows for every additional census response, it's big bucks when you don't report on the order of 400,000 Latinx kids 0 to 5 in 2010. So these communities that are the hardest to count communities are also the most marginalized and the most at risk, and also those in the greatest need of representation and resources. So for me, census actually compares pretty favorably to voting. Voting is, as complex as we all know, is kind of like something that only a parent could love. I do it, but not everyone does for understandable reasons, and also for voter suppression and so on, as we're more increasingly aware, but not usually due to misunderstanding or fear, which is kind of the challenge we face with the census. We have some real issues to address in the next year. Census Day is April 1st, 2000, so we have about a year to build a posse for census. And as you can see, and these are optimistic Census Bureau numbers, that basically the darker blues are very likely or somewhat likely to participate. The folks at the top are unlikely, and this is not going to be, I think this is a relatively optimistic sample, even though it's not very positive, right? So we have a lot of work to do. Voting has a rebranding problem. Census has a branding problem. It doesn't even exist for most folks. They don't know what it is. They don't know why it matters. This room is clearly far more aware than most that I've been in. This is like a chance, right? So for me, this is a civic act. This is a chance to build something, not to resist, to make a difference. We need to convince the 140 million households in the United States that that's also the case. So my big concern here is, besides this sociopolitical environment that we live in, is the media and technology space, which is radically different, Jen said, from even 5 years ago and certainly from 10 years ago. And the census and all these other orgs are just not prepared for it, right? So census has used technology for a long time, but this is a whole different ball of wax. There was barely social media. There were not a lot of cord cutters. Netflix was barely streaming in 2010. So things are really changing. And in this particularly polarized moment, no one's even doing awareness raising for census. There's not any of the dollars or the media flowing until basically later this year or early next year. January is when the government media is going to come out. So we have a gap there. And most civil society orgs with the exception of the people in this room, don't really understand media making or social engagement, right? And this is where it's going to happen, as we all know. And at the same time, you have regressive forces inside government and out who are pushing to politicize the census. So right now, we're losing critical time to kind of take action to build awareness and momentum and commitment to participating in the census. That's the help I need, right? I need that story. I need you to help me and help our extended team to think about what that means. And so right now, we're just trying to be part of that change. We're trying to leverage the tools we have, thinking about creative communities, about new media, about our networks, extended networks, and just working to say, let's start doing stuff. Let's hold, for instance, pop-ups. Let's start making media. This is some of the media that our collaborators have made, and just start doing stuff. See what works, and start to figure out how that fits into a broader storytelling frame. Now, we are working with influencers, we're working with media personalities, with Hollywood. This was generated in like 3 hours at a pop-up that we did, and they did a whole bunch of these crazy things, and some of them were probably illegal, but some were hilarious. So we're just starting. So what I want to do today is invite you all to join this cabal, this coalition of folks who care about our country, about our communities, about democracy, to focus both on the local and on the national, to engage in creative and effective ways to get people to feel ownership over the census, because after all, it is their data, it is a civic act, and it can lead to not just the civic acts of voting or census filling out every 2 or 10 years, but daily civic acts, and thinking about who we are as residents and citizens and people who live in our communities in this country. So with that, I want to invite you to approach me, to text me, to tweet at me, to whatever, and help us figure out how to tell the story to get people to jump those hurdles, and make sure that amazing little child gets her resources, her money, power, representation, and is seen by the world. So thank you very much.